This conference will now be recorded.
So we'll call to order the Monterey Select Board on June 13th at 6 p.m. and all three members are present here in Town Hall. The first item of business is to welcome Courteny Morehouse from BRPC. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're getting an update on the Route 23 culvert project and the MVP grant, which is the culvert right here at Town Hall.
Exactly. Look, and I have things to look at, so you're not just listening to me. Don't get too excited to mostly table, so that's the best I could do. So this is a project that is a follow-up to a MVP or municipal vulnerability preparedness grant that was completed in 2020, I believe. So we being the town of Monterey, applied for follow-up funding to do final engineering designs and permitting, and final cost estimates for the replacement of the Route 23 main road culvert. So that kicked off in October, and since then we've been meeting with the engineer GZA to do engineer design. So we're at the end of our first year, fiscal year, for this project, and we have about 60% complete designs plus hydrologic and hydraulic study as well as the geotechnical. So I'll sort of explain all the elements that we've designed to date, and by we I mean the collective, Melissa No, Jim Hunt, myself as BRPC, as well as GZA. What we sort of have gone over to date, and then some of the things that are still TBD and will sort of get worked out as we go through the permitting process with Mass DOT. So the main thing that was done was the H&H study. So it stands for hydrologic and hydraulic. So just a little background, hydrologic is basically the amount of rain that comes from the sky, both in current day and in future climate change predictions. And hydraulic is basically how that rainfall interacts and flows over the landscape. So together they sort of give you a snapshot of, not a snapshot, but they give you a pretty comprehensive idea as to how much water, how much volume, and the force of that volume flowing through that point at the culvert, right? And that's really culvert to be able to accommodate not just today's current scenario.
So we have background noise, so we're gonna, if you can cut out the background noise, otherwise we're gonna have to mute you. Sorry.
That's all good, as well as future scenarios. So some of the graphs that I'm showing are basically a breakdown of the current versus future scenario based on that study. In short, we're about to get a lot more rain.
Really?
And yeah, I know,
When is it
yeah.
coming? 'Cause we can use it right now.
Yeah, I know. We're about to get a lot more rain, but not over time the way we're used to in smaller storms. It's going to happen in bigger storms that happen a little more frequently. So one of the things that we really look at is different storm return intervals. That is, in any given year, what's the 2% chance of this size storm happening? What's the 50% chance of this size storm happening? The way we refer to that is by the 25-year storm, which basically means it's a 4% chance of that storm happening in any given year. And the 100-year storm, which is basically, think of Irene, that's sort of the level of scenario we're talking about. That's 100-year storm of today will become more frequent. So the 100-year storm of the future has different amounts of rainfall. Does this make sense so far? Okay, great. So what they found through the H&H study is that in terms of just general rainfall and the number of storms that we'll get, a 25-year storm, which is how we usually design different road stream crossings or culverts, we use the 25-year standard because that's what Mass DOT requires, is expected to increase, the amount of precipitation for that 25-year storm is expected to increase by about 38%. But then if you look at the 100-year storm, that's looking at a 72% increase in precipitation. So, you start to see how those storms aren't just happening more frequently, they're getting kind of bigger, right? And you can see that the increase in the amount is bigger when you get a bigger storm, proportionally, right? And then you take that and you also look at the peak inflow. That is, in every single storm, there's a peak event, right? That's the highest, the most amount of rain you'll get in a 24-hour period. So we look at that peak to go, that's the scenario we want to prepare for, because that's the most the culvert is going to be able to take in any 24-hour period. So when we look at that peak flow, we are seeing a 97% increase for a 25-year storm and 162% increase for a 100-year. Again, we're just designing for the 25-year storm because that's what Mass DOT requires. But we want to see how the culvert would perform under a worst case scenario, which is a 100-year storm, right? So that's what we have here. So we run all those numbers, and then in the end, what they do is they start to design and compare the current 10-year culvert, 10-foot culvert, sorry, not 10-year, they're just trying to throw out numbers. But the current 10-foot culvert and how it would perform based on the height of the water, right? So the two things we look at is the top of the road, because what we're looking at is what is the likelihood that the road is gonna overtop and Route 23 won't be passable? And the other thing we look for is the freeboard, which is basically the space between the top of the culvert and the top of the flow line, right? That headspace is called freeboard. So Mass DOT, when they look at our plans, they wanna know how much freeboard is there in the different storm scenarios, and then they have different allowances for that freeboard, okay? Hopefully I'm not going too fast. But basically, your current culvert passes current day storms except for, let's see, this is the present day, except for your 100-year storm scenario in which there's less than 2 feet. In other words, it's 2 feet above the top of the bottom of the culvert.
50-year also?
And the 50-year.
Yeah.
But this isn't, 0.5, 6 inches. Yes, there's no freeboard, but you can see that with the 100-year, it also goes over top the road by just a little bit, right? 0.1 feet. So what is that,
Assuming
like 3 inches
all
or
the
so,
averages
right?
work out.
So you could
yeah.
still pass over Route 23 in a current 100-year storm, given your current culvert size.
Assuming everything helped.
Assuming everything held, and it was all, structurally sound. So then if we look at the replacement, which is a 25-foot culvert, the span is 25 feet. The height, I believe, is 10 feet still, and they're sort of playing around with that height. And I'll get to that a little bit later. You will pass all of the present day and as well as what they call the later century, which is 2070. Why 2070? Well, when we look at all of the hydrologic and hydraulic data, we run it through the state's climate, I think it's state's climate design standards tool. And they basically tell us what we need to design the culvert or structure for. It's not just for culverts, it's all sorts of things. And the timeline they gave us is 2070. So why pick that? Because the state told us to. Right. So when you look at that, you're looking at a 25-year storm, and you can see there's about a foot-ish of freeboard, and it fully clears the road by about 2-3 feet. It also will pass, it'll just barely not pass a 100-year storm. It's about 0.2 inches. So essentially in a 100-year storm with a 25-foot culvert, you will, it'll be hitting the head wall by about 0.2 feet, right? So about 3 inches or so will be hitting the head wall. But Route 23 will be completely passable. It won't overtop the road at all. That's essentially boiled down, what the H&H study is boiled down to is what are the benefits of giving us a 25-foot culvert versus the current day 10-foot. So then the other thing they looked at was, so I'll just pause there. Are there any questions about the storm projections?
We do have one question.
Yeah.
So I don't have a question about the storm projection, but
Yeah.
a question about the footprint of the 10-foot versus the 25-foot
Yeah,
culvert. And I suppose you might already be getting into that, but.
yeah, we'll get into that. But the footprint will be a bigger structure. It'll be a wider structure. So.
So wider or longer? Like if you're going along the road, when you say wider, you mean?
I mean, if you're going along the road, it'll be longer in which you're passing over what will become a bridge. It will no longer be a culvert with the replacement, it'll basically be an arch bridge. So it'll be a wider arch bridge. The other thing that they're looking at, based on community feedback, is widening it along the river as well to allow a pedestrian walkway. That is still TBD. It really was just something that we said, what would this look like? How would it increase the cost? If it's something that doesn't increase the cost so much, then it might be worth putting it in there and not having to go back and do it later if it's something that's desired. But yeah, that's sort of the general. So right now, the widest point of the current culvert is 15, so it would be widened by about 10 feet.
So of course, there's a road here going up to the park
Yeah,
and the post office, and then there's a home here.
yeah.
So how do those three pieces get impacted?
So, just trying to look at it basically moves on both sides, it expands out towards both town hall and onto that, all within the right of way. And then depending on where the pedestrian bridge, there'd be questions about where does that go? Who does it encroach upon? Does it go on the post office side? Does it go on the other side?
Okay.
Yeah. So, good question. Any other questions about H&H or stormwater projections? Okay. So the second report that was done, or the second technical piece that was done, was the geotechnical that basically takes borings at two locations, both at the upstream side of the culvert and the downstream side, and it analyzes the soil and then goes all the way down to the bedrock to analyze the bedrock. And the idea behind that is to figure out how stable is the soils and what kind of footings are required in order to make the new replacement structurally sound and stable. I don't know as much about that because I'm not a geologist, instead I'm a stormwater expert, so I'm going to do my best. But basically at the end of the geotechnical, their advice, working with the precast designer and their structural engineers, was that they could do a replacement that has a shallow, long support structures that fit underneath. And then, so they would look a little bit like this. And these are the footings, right? So the wing walls and the base of the culvert is this kind of spread function with gravel and crushed rock underneath it that creates a sort of stable. I think there's still some questions about whether they do borings that actually link it, drill down and bind it to the bedrock or not. But I don't know if they've come up with an answer on that. I think they're still working with the precast designer on that one.
Where would the concrete wall and the river portion be, like? Is
So
this
it
just
drills down-
conceptual, or is there?
Yeah, so it drills down about, I think, 4 feet to go down below the frost line. And then it gets backfilled with organic silt soil, basically to match the current substrate that's there.
I guess what I mean is, where are we talking about doing
So where the current wing walls, I think, are basically it's going to look very similar to the current wing walls, right? In terms of the angle, but it'll be sort of spread out a little bit more. And then it'll be at the very bottom of those and then 4 feet down. Yeah. So in the end, this is sort of the shape of the bridge. You can see it is no longer an elliptical culvert with a bottom. It's now an arch bridge. This height between the top of the road and the top of the culvert is variable, and the reason we're sort of still trying to determine that is because of the water line. So they met with the GZA met with the water company to discuss different scenarios so that you can both maintain pressure as well as have continuous and accessible water lines. The preferred scenario on both GZA and the water company is to bury it in between the top of the road and the top of the culvert, so it's actually buried in the road at the upstream site. But there's a question as to whether we can do that given the height of the culvert, and that I think has to do with, the flow and how much water we're trying to accommodate.
It's even possible to service it if it's very full.
Right, well, I think there would be, manhole covers within the road itself that you could actually access the line.
Gotcha.
And that would be insulated within the roadway. Insulated, so it's like basically I think it's gonna end up being 8 inches, most of that insulation with, I think, a 4-inch pipe for service line. The sort of next best scenario that they came up with is to actually put it on the outside. Which, I think the biggest concern there is if you have a 100-year storm, is that going to hit the head wall and then therefore threaten the water line? Given that those are less frequent storms, perhaps that's a risk you take. Obviously, that's the most maintainable because it's right outside the culvert. But it stays on the upstream side, so that's reduction in costs. The third most desirable option is to bury it on the upstream side, but I think the water company doesn't love that idea because they can't service it as well. And then the least desirable of all these options is to basically reroute it and put it on the other side, the downstream side along the head wall.
So you have to cross the road twice.
Yeah, exactly, which is an increase in cost, so that's probably less desirable. And you still have it exposed, so there's a question of whether the insulation will be good enough, given that it's not a high pressure water system. So those, anyway, all of those are getting looked at. I don't know that they've made a determination yet. I think they're still sort of figuring out what insulation materials exist, how much they have in between the road and the top of the culvert, et cetera. So when we get those, we'll obviously share them that way. The other sort of things that are still getting tweaked in the design is the wing wall angles. I think it's gonna mimic what's happening here. It's just to figure out like what's the force of the flow and how is it going to hit the wing walls? Do those need to be adjusted? And then, as I mentioned before, the foundations are still getting sort of worked out based on the geotechnical. So that is sort of the long and short of it. I'm open to questions. So far, we don't have an update in the cost estimate. So the last estimate that we got during conceptual was 2.1 million, and so far we haven't gotten an updated cost on that, so.
And I'm assuming until there's a clear finished design, you can't even estimate how long it would take or whether it's possible to do it. I mean, this doesn't seem like the sort of thing you can do half and half.
No, yeah, well, you could close, so that is the other thing that they are exploring, and we're still not quite sure, but one of the things we've looked at with GZA when they did their site visit is how long it would take to close down half of Route 23 and do half of it and then do the other half, versus one suggestion that was made is a rerouting of the traffic, just not a reroute as in a detour, but like, somebody suggested that when they built this in the 1970s, there was a road that was built from basically the town hall parking lot to in front of the Gray House. I don't know anything about that, but they said they would look into it. And the owner, basically the owner of that house basically said that that's how it used to be.
Can we come up and peek?
Yeah, go ahead. Huh. So, I don't know, that would obviously, well, that would be crazy, and a little inconvenient, especially for the person who's living in the Gray House there. It would be the quickest and most affordable way to detour cars around without closing Route 23. It would allow you to take that completely down and then rebuild it all at once, as opposed to rebuilding it in sections, which is gonna elongate it by about 2 times the construction.
So can I ask on this diagram?
Yeah,
Where's the ground? Like,
so
is the road like here?
no,
or
the
down
road
here,
goes
or
on
right up
top
there?
of this head wall here, yeah.
So
So
that goes all
imagine
the way
that, yeah, imagine this is the road here,
Oh, I see.
and then this is the bottom of the stream.
So it's not like we're gonna be going up over a hill.
No, it doesn't change the topography of the road.
Oh, got it,
Yeah.
okay. Alright.
So just to follow up on the detour question, is it the general consensus of all the people working on the project that we're gonna need to keep traffic flowing through the center of town and not,
Right.
there's no other way to do that.
I think
Because,
we haven't heard too much appetite from anyone that we've talked to about detouring, especially big trucks, because there's just not really that many roads in Monterey that can accommodate the bigger trucks. Smaller cars, sure, you could detour them on maybe a dirt road, but bigger trucks, especially when you get that mud season or the freeze thaws during the winter, like, that's gonna be a pretty big impact, and I don't know that they could accommodate the weight. So I think the general consensus was keep running Route 23 open.
in the center of town, one way or another, yeah, okay. Yeah, I would tend to agree, I think,
I can't imagine I mean, there's only two other potential routes that I can think of, and both of them
Both
would
of
have
them have-
serious
yeah.
problems with
Exactly.
trucks and with mud.
Yeah, I think that's what we had sort of looked at as well and went, neither of these routes have a really great option to them.
the other question I have is, it says here 60%.
Yeah.
Design. Am I correct that within the current phase 2, we're getting 100% design?
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
So the Mass DOT, so basically with 60% design, we can then go through what's called a Mass DOT Chapter 85 review. So because this culvert is increasing to over 20 feet, Mass DOT basically requires a review so that it meets their standards of a rural major artery as well as a bridge, a 20-foot plus bridge. So in order to get that Mass DOT review, we need at minimum 60%. Now, it's 60% is what I have, but in a few days and by the end of the fiscal year, we'll have 90% designs, and that's what we'll be sending to Mass DOT along with the geotechnical and H&H.
so what's the next decision that the select board has to make? Is there a phase 3 of the MVP program?
Yeah, I mean,
Phase 2?
implementation, like actual construction is sort of the phase 3. And I think, there's no decisions to be made per se. The biggest decision is going to be when we get those new cost estimates, what do we want to, like, how do we have that discussion and what do we want to eliminate? For example, if the pedestrian walkway is going to add, I don't know, making these numbers up for like $1 million more, you might go, there's no way that we're going to, even with grant funding, be able to cover that. So let's,
Call from 619-890-0581. Anyone to answer?
No. Not. I didn't even know my phone did that. I was like, surely that's somebody else's phone.
And you looked over at us, I'm like, no.
I know, it's like, you're like, no, that's coming out of your
That's
phone.
not my area.
Um,
So you just mentioned grant funding.
Yeah.
So is this something that the state then helps the communities with, any
Yes.
community that this needs to
Yeah.
happen in?
It's a really interesting question, and I mean, one of the reasons why we're looking at climate data projection is one, not only to better prepare the town for a future, climate scenario with more stormwater, but because the grant funding that we're going after is specifically climate change grant funding that the state provides through what's called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. I wish they called it something else because the acronym is just MVP, which means so many things. But that's the idea. And that grant funding covers for a town like Monterey, which is considered economically disadvantaged, they cover 90% of the costs. So that means that the big decision before the Board of Selectmen at the end of this whole project and for annual town meeting and budgetary questions, all that, will be, do you want to cover 10% of this and what does match look like? You might not have to cover 10% of the cash, we may be able to come up with, in-kind match, all that, but that's sort of the next, big question.
I would think the question would also include yes or no to the pedestrian way and
Yeah,
the
all of
question
those
of
sort of,
how the actual implementation.
Correct.
So
yeah,
one lane at a time or whole thing.
yes,
is a go.
right.
So speaking of the pedestrian, it wouldn't narrow the road at all.
It would not narrow the road,
Okay.
yeah, because the road has to meet a certain Mass DOT width standard, you can't narrow the road. According to
We have a lot of
Mass DOT.
pedestrians that are.
Right, it
Yeah.
would widen the culvert instead.
Right.
You know,
Lengthen.
well, yeah,
No,
depending on how you look
widen,
at it.
And
It'll
lengthen.
it'll
Lengthen
lengthen
going
the
this way.
roadway,
Right, right.
yeah. It'll
Widen across the
widen,
river.
yeah, across
Okay.
the river, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's-
Lengthen the road, widen across the river.
Yes.
Okay.
Bigger and then bigger,
Okay.
both ways. So that'll be the question.
So at what point will you need answers about pedestrians and detours?
I mean, you know, I think when we get those cost estimates, we'll wanna present it to you again and get your input. It's not so much a vote, it's more of, you know, we wanna gather the input and figure out what direction we wanna tell the engineers to go when they put together the final designs. Yeah, but that'll include your alls, plus I think we wanna also gather public input. and
That's what I
see-
was just gonna say,
Yeah.
what's the plan to gather
Yeah.
public input, like,
So we're hoping to do an info session that's, you know, open to the public in July. We're also tabling at the annual steak roast and just presenting the plans that we have and having conversations with folks and, you know, recording those. And then as I've been going through this, I've been doing attending regular meetings with like Conservation Commission, Planning Board, et cetera, so that those bodies are also up to date on what the current plans are.
I think it would be really helpful, if we're asking for public input on the decision to have a pedestrian way or not, to have the associated cost estimates at that point.
Yes, of course.
Because,
yeah.
I mean, I think 90% of the people
Everybody's
say,
gonna say,
of course there should be a
yes,
pedestrian way.
I want a pedestrian walkway.
Until it's 3.5 million instead of 2 million.
Yeah,
And then they're like, oh, maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
What's the timeline for the whole project? You said you'd have 90% of the drawings in July.
Hmm.
You do the
So then,
public presentation, do the financial.
yeah, the whole project ends June 30th of next year. So that's when,
2024.
yeah, exactly. That's when we wrap up the engineering and permitting phase. So at that point, we'll have, you know, we want to get the 90% designs. That's what we want to really get the input on, especially around costs and the pedestrian walkway and any of the other details that we have, detours, that sort of thing, the things that impact people's lives. And then, they take those and they go through the Mass DOT approval, that's sort of the big permitting process, as well as Conservation Commission getting an NOI. And then from that point, we'll have all the permits secured, and the final designs. And you can choose to let that go and say, no, we're not doing that, or you can choose to say, yes, we'd like to go after more grant funding and actually replace it.
And if we do that, any thoughts on what the timeline is like? Assuming,
So-
let's assume that a design was approved. and we
Yeah.
have to go forward.
Yeah, so if you're ready to go forward and the designs are approved, et cetera, you can apply for the grant, for an MVP grant, I believe, next spring, 2024. And you will receive funding if you're awarded funding, August of 2024. So that's when you
building
start kicking off.
2025 would be.
Yeah, basically building, 2020, the summer of 2025 would be basically what you're looking at. That's sort of the accelerated timeline. You can also, you know, wait a year, and do it in the summer of 2026. It's really up to how gung ho everybody is about implementing and getting this done. Yeah. And BRPC is there to sort of help write the grants and distribute the funding if you all want, you know, assistance with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Just a quick question, Courtney, in the look upstream, look downstream,
Yeah,
has the dam just downriver been
looked at.
looked at in relation to this?
It was looked at in the last grant, and the determination was that because it was used for fire, and because it's a historical dam, that it wouldn't get removed. And there wasn't, according to the engineers at the time, there wasn't much benefit to removing it in terms of flood resilience. So in all those aspects, they determined that, you know, they would keep it there and run all the scenarios based on it being present. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, do you want to keep this?
Yes.
It's great. Thank you. You were really clear and helpful and thorough. It's
Oh, good.
greatly appreciated.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's what I get paid to do.
Guess what? Some people
You're doing
are
well.
good at their jobs.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
The next item is the truck loan on what wasn't at 550 and then was a generic.
The not
550 truck. So the way that I understand it, this is a 6-month note to get us to November in line with our other notes.
To pick up the total now. Yep.
At which point in November, we're gonna put down a $40,000 principal payment on it, right?
On this one. Isn't that right now that we're doing that? Right, to pay them off that as Right.
Well, no, I don't know, because 100, if we sign this for 160, should we really be signing it for 100?
It would be 120 if we were doing that. But where would the 40 go? Directly to the. Yeah, but to whom? Not, it might not
Well,
be the
why are
same
we
person
borrowing
that's the
100,
borrower.
why are we borrowing 160
60 when we
now when
could
we
just
should be
pay
borrowing
down the 40.
120?
Yeah, I would have to agree with you.
That's
What
what,
is the 40 there, how's it written in the,
what's that?
how do we write it up?
We set aside $40,000 towards this $160,000
Out of the free
truck.
cash, right?
Right, but that's in fiscal year 24, and the
Yeah.
truck is coming in fiscal year 23.
That's why.
But I wanna go back to Eric because he says that free cash special articles continue year after year because they're not tied to an operating budget. We have the free cash, right?
Right, but didn't you just approve it in this town meeting warrant?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just
That
approved
doesn't-
in May,
right,
first week
so
of May,
July.
so that's.
I
it.
don't, it makes no sense how, if we had a special town meeting, the date, if we had a special town meeting right now, then the free cash would be available tomorrow. But if we approve it at an annual town meeting, the free cash doesn't free up till July
Because
1.
the annual town meeting warrant is for the following fiscal year.
But it's not
unless you-
tied to a fiscal year, right? Because they just carry forward year after year.
This special
It's
warrant.
sort of like-
The
special
warrant
article.
itself is tied to a fiscal year unless you specify that we wanna use it in the current fiscal year.
Except that
When
you
is the
can,
invoice due?
when's what due? When's this due?
They're gonna be paying for it next week.
Can't you just put it off until July?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Well,
I mean, you're so close.
well, but I'm seriously stuck with Eric on we're saying that free cash special articles are tied, because of the warrant, they're innately tied to the next fiscal year. But they're not really, because we can carry them forward year after year because they're not tied to the fiscal year. If we have the free cash and we voted on it,
All you're doing is approving the use of free cash and like putting it
Yeah, but-
aside.
Take her suggestion
Just
and make it
postpone
July
it.
first.
Yeah,
It
Just do it
becomes,
July
I mean, the interest, the delaying of what,
they just keep the truck another week.
well, I know I'm even talking a week, I think that we have the free cash available now.
Well, so
But-
there's two issues. The
well,
first
you
is-
have two, what you're saying, we have two options. We need to check if we can free it up now, or B, we wait till July first and do it
But either way, we wanna
It's
put
the
the 40
13th,
now
you
because
have
it's,
17
that's
days.
still
then.
3 months
The
ahead.
primary thing with snow
Mm-hmm.
removal, we were out.
When is it, November that they?
That this comes due.
Right, so that's a bunch
And
of.
I know-
Well, it's a.
Well, David always says you don't have to pay interest during the first year, the first payment. But you have to imagine some kind of interest
You
is
gotta pay
You don't have
interest.
to pay it, but you're accruing it.
I understand, so I
The
think,
bill's
why
not
don't we
gonna
just
go away.
try to take out a note for 120 one way or another? Just cause last year, we took out a note for, how much was it? More than, what was the amount,
Yeah,
80,000?
Was $30,000 more than you needed, that one?
It was, I thought it was higher. It was like 50,000 more than we needed, we borrowed.
That was because they failed to actually do the pay down or something?
That was cause they just didn't use the money.
Right, they didn't use, we had set aside
Against
money
the
to
thing.
pay it down and we didn't for whatever reason, right?
What's the rate?
Yeah.
1%?
What?
What's the
That you've
rate?
been waiting this long.
I know.
You can wait 2 weeks.
Don't borrow money you don't need to
But-
borrow.
I know.
But
because
do you
the-
understand the free
I
cash
understand
and
what you're
special
saying,
articles?
and I have seen, in fact, I have seen in this this warrant, I believe you just did, there was one that said specifically FY
Yes.
'23 free cash.
But why do we even need to do that?
I don't know that you do or you don't, I'm not gonna opine on that, cause that's not my role, but I think the easiest thing to do is just delay for 12 days to pick up your vehicle.
Yeah, I know, that's the easy
That's
solution.
it, that's just,
But it's not
that just makes
debatable.
sense.
It's the easiest solution, but I'd still like to know the answer to the other question. Because if the special article free cash for special articles isn't tied to a fiscal year, then it shouldn't be tied to, I mean, it's two different issues. The easiest thing is to get the truck on the first and not
So the
issue
truck is
it.
actually in the operating budget, it's not in the special article.
The debt service.
$44,000 is in the debt service in the operating budget,
Okay, good point, yeah, I was wrong about that.
and she's in a meeting, she can't answer questions.
But if it's in the operating budget, then it is tied to fiscal year, so the only option would be to,
Wait
Wait, I'm
17
sorry,
days.
what is, I'm just curious. It wasn't 40,000 in free cash, it was.
No, it was raise and appropriate in the debt service, it was a
Oh.
line item in the budget, I was mistaken, I'm sorry.
it
It
wasn't a
was
special
raising
article.
appropriate money towards the truck?
Yes. Towards debt service, towards the truck. It's under the debt service lines, we had three
Yeah.
lines under debt service, the library, the tandem axle dump truck, and this truck,
You put it in as a debt payment,
we put it as a debt
well,
payment.
then I think you're stuck.
Why is that?
Cause you specified that it needed to be used to pay down debt, not that it needed to be used to buy a truck.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're not gonna-
I think that was probably, that's where maybe the catch is gonna be.
So in other words, we can't use it as a down payment because it has to be used for debt.
Mhm.
Although, isn't a bill a debt?
Again, I'm not gonna,
I know,
I
I'm
can't
just.
say,
Well, I
I
just-
can't,
My only concern was that we would forget that we have it and borrow the 160,000 again, like we did last year, that's my.
40,000.
I think enough people here are aware of this, we're not gonna let you do that.
Right. But I would have liked to not pay the interest for those months either, but if we can, we can.
Okay, Sarah might be available within the next half hour.
No, she's in an award ceremony for.
So what happens if we put it off a week?
I can't, she needs that tomorrow.
Because,
Is Sarah the banker?
The treasurer.
but you still could delay. But you-
Let me just see if she'll answer if we can delay.
but the line item was,
And why do you wanna delay, so I can just get this?
so we can use the money that we set against it right away instead of borrowing
More.
an extra 40,000.
But you can't use it because it's not available till July 1st.
That's the point.
Yeah.
If we get the truck on July 1st, then it would be the new fiscal year. We could take the 40 and put it as a down payment and only have to carry the debt of 120 instead of 160. Did I say that clearly?
You said it right.
Okay.
And I know it's under the debt service heading, but the line itself didn't say anything about debt. It said, I guess it said it's in here, it said F550 truck, then we had to go back and, now this says F350.
I thought we weren't doing a freaking.
Yeah, well, does that,
Didn't we try to get
But
away
then-
from the?
No,
Ford
well, but this
designation?
was it, so we changed it to a 20,000.
Girls, take away.
Right, she has to have copies of the certified annual town meeting votes in there. So
Oh, you know
that's
what,
all
didn't
the-
we have to amend that at
Right,
town
so
meeting too?
that's in there as well. The first 3 pages are the documents so that one's the first meeting. And that one's the,
But what's not in here was the line item in the budget.
about financial?
she doesn't need that, this is all that she needed.
Why do we need the line item in the budget?
Because I just wanna make sure we set aside 40,000 to pay down this truck. And the earlier that we can pay that, the less interest rate, and also then we don't forget. You're going to the certified town meeting minutes.
That's my plan. I was trying. Go on, go.
So Justin, essentially, cost of the truck is 160, but you have 40 of it in raise and appropriate, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And the intention was to get that 40,000 off the first year.
First 5 months.
Yeah, I think what Sarah, I forget if Sarah or just David from Unibank, David Eisenthal, but we agreed, okay, we don't need to set aside any money, but our debt service payments are low this year because we only have the dump truck and the library. And so we are gonna put, even though we're not required to, we're gonna put,
So she says no, but you can, when you redo the borrowing, you can borrow for the reduced amount.
well, I'd hope so. But we didn't last year, but I'd hope so. But we have 44,000 on line 700.
You're still gonna end up borrowing $40,000 when you have, yeah, it's too bad that happened, but I think that's,
Next time we should structure it a little bit differently.
But
yeah,
we
I mean,
can't,
next time your warrant article could have been raise and appropriate $40,000 and borrow 120, right?
but it was 2 different town meetings, because we voted to borrow, we voted to borrow the previous annual town meeting. And then we voted to change the name of it at the special town meeting. And then at the most recent annual town meeting, we
I
voted
see.
to put 44,000
I see,
towards the debt service.
I get you now.
Towards a highway truck.
Yeah.
44,000, but we can't wait till July 1.
Right.
We can't wait till July 1, so we'll sign this for 160. When this comes due,
Is there a prepayment clause? What if we prepay it on July 1st, then we only have to pay interest for the 2 weeks?
17 days.
Is this State House note or is it something else?
It's a BAN.
That's a ban?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, some of them you can't
Some
prepay,
of them you can't, yeah.
some of them they just won't let you prepay, but
Right.
I wouldn't know if this one can.
Beats me. That's why I asked.
Yeah, no, that's a
It's a
good
reasonable
creative
question, but we don't know
solution,
the answer.
but some of them are pretty strict about not.
So it looks like we need to sign it and go ahead with it, and we need to find out if we can do the prepayment July 1st, which would just reduce the amount of interest we have to pay.
I mean, just because we can't stall the truck by 2 weeks.
Apparently, there's.
I mean, I guess we're talking at that point.
Right,
But you know what, the plan had always been to borrow the 160 in June and to pay 44 towards it in November,
right.
of which 4,000, we calculated 4,000 was gonna be interest and 40 was gonna be principal.
Right.
Right.
So apparently, 6 months of interest is $4,000.
Well, now, what's the interest, I mean, you can figure it out quickly, what's the interest on that?
Does it say the interest rate?
Thing on the interest rate?
I think it'd be in the rate side documents.
.38% per
So
annum.
she said you with notes, you cannot make a prepayment.
There you
What did you
That's
say it was?
go. 4.38, but we can't make prepayments, so.
But can we wait till July 1 and pay,
I said, can you make a prepayment on July 1? No, unfortunately, with notes, they can't, I'm sorry.
but could we put the 44 directly against the truck and then borrow the 116?
Sorry,
Can we
but
just pay the whole
are
thing?
those your, is that your?
So that we could use the 40.
Sorry, I was waiting for people talking.
Can we get the truck on July 1st and then put 44 right against the truck and then take out a ban for 116? I don't know.
It would be 120 because 4 is some of
4
the
is the interest, right?
I think you're stuck, Jess.
Well,
Okay.
I've already asked her that, if you
Yeah.
could delay a week, so they can only borrow 120, and she said no.
Okay,
So I think we do it.
Yep.
But next time we plan better.
okay,
$4,000 cost of learning.
but we will pay it. Everyone's saying, everyone remember, we will pay it in November and we won't be taking out nothing again.
Correct. And we'll make sure to converse with those taking out the ban the couple of weeks before we have to sign the papers, so we're not trying to correct it at the last minute.
No, I just honestly just thought, I
I know.
didn't think of this ahead, I thought of it as I saw the
I didn't
160
think of it
figure.
either.
Alright, so we'll move to approve the $160,000 6-month ban for the highway truck.
Second,
Any more discussion on that? Alright, we'll vote,
yes,
Yes,
and yes, so that's approved, and we will sign that.
Although I think we might need to call it a BAN, because otherwise it sounds just wrong. A ban.
Well-
A truck ban, we're banning trucks.
So we have to
Yeah, is
sign
it 3 cents?
all those things.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about the confusion, I just had a flashback to what happened last year.
There's no signature on that, but. I apologize, I think it was an important discussion and a reminder to keep us focused, and that when we're getting things ready for next year, we need to remind ourselves to structure things so that if we're planning to put a down payment on something, we structure the warrant so that that is doable, and we schedule the payments so it takes that into account.
Yeah, and part of what was going on with this payment, which we didn't know exactly when the truck would be here. But we did kind of expect it would be a 6-month note, carry us to November.
But if we don't know when something's due, we can probably still structure things to give us the flexibility so that we can do the down payment.
Yes.
You know, have to do it retroactively.
Yeah, you have to word it more carefully.
Well, the only thing though was it was a raise and appropriate, so that's always only gonna be July.
July.
I still don't understand the special article thing, but that's for another time. Appointments,
I think we've got all the pages.
we have some appointments. You wanna make the motions, I'll make the motions, Susan.
I nominate Kevin West to appoint him as tree warden, with a term until the next election,
Second.
presumably in May.
Yes, second that. Any other discussion? We'll vote,
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Kevin.
much. Thank you.
thank you.
Who do I talk to about next steps?
Melissa,
Why don't you come talk to me?
Okay.
Although the clerk is here this evening, so you could go get sworn in right now.
Yes, because you actually can't do any official duties until you do that, it's not, they want you down there, see, then it's gonna, actually, no, you left at 6, sorry.
Oh, we left it.
They'll be here on Thursday, from
Okay.
1 to
On
6, I
Thursday.
believe.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
So, I move to reappoint Tim Lovett to the Conservation Commission for a duration of 3 months.
A second,
any other discussion? We'll vote,
yes.
yes.
Yes,
That's
and thank you,
unanimous
Tim,
approval.
for hanging in there another 3 months.
They tried to get to December, so, you know.
We've really,
Yeah,
I don't know, we're gonna have to lean on Kevin to think about it, cause I think he'd be a good,
there's supposed to be 3 years. We need
Oh,
people for
yeah.
Concom.
I know. we really do. Go for it,
yeah,
Frank, you're up.
Okay, I nominate, reappoint Dorene Beller to the Culture Council
For 3 years.
for 3 years.
Second, any discussion? Vote,
Yes.
Yes,
yes, unanimous.
thank you, Doreen. I'll nominate Kolby Bleau,
Blow,
for an indefinite appointment as a firefighter for the town of Monterey.
I second
any discussion? We'll vote,
it.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, unanimous, approved, thank you.
I'll do the next one. I nominate Sheldon Langley, indefinite to transfer station attendant appointment.
Second, any discussion? We'll vote,
Yes.
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 Alright, first one is for $200 from the tax collector software to the tax collector other expenses. I think that's why she's here.
No, the signal detected, sorry.
Should we do them as a whole, or?
That's only 3 of them, right?
We have to just sign them, so
Right.
whether we do them as a whole or not, we still gotta sign them.
This-
And then $10,281.71 from snow and ice to snow and ice overtime.
I mean, do we have somebody, do you wanna discuss it?
No,
Seems fairly
raise,
straightforward.
put a hold on it if you have a question.
And then $258.47 from fire department uniforms to fire department other.
Got the date right there? The
So I would
13th.
move to approve the transfers as read out by Melissa and on these forms
Second,
as a group. There's a second. Any discussion on that? We'll vote.
yeah,
Yes, that's unanimous approval.
And I think you all have a copy of the total vacation carry forward requests in your pile.
is Pete planning on taking any of his days? They're not.
So Pete had 2 additional weeks on top of that, which he is taking right now, and at the end of June, that's the balance of.
So, guy who just likes to keep on working.
Yeah, I think he had a lot of extenuating circumstances that prevented him.
So, that's a thing that happens, I get it.
Motion to approve the vacation carryover requests as requested.
Second,
Any discussion on those? The vote
Yes,
yes,
and yes, so those are all approved.
now
do
that,
we need to initial some?
No.
So the next one, I was just making you guys aware, I sent an email, somebody responded that, if you want to follow up on the recall vote, you actually have to refile it at town meeting again, because, apparently they thought Senator Mark had filed it, but it turns out he did not, so it has not been refiled up to this point. And the House's position is that in order to be refiled, the town would need to cast another vote approving the language.
this is the stupidest system, like, it's ridiculous. I mean, I sort of felt like we should put it on the next one. And let them give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because it's something we should have. If people aren't doing a job that they're elected for, then we should be able to remove them. Because we've had people that just didn't show up to work. And that's not a good situation, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so it has to be a special act.
yeah,
If
so
we
we
could-
have to approve it at a town meeting and then resubmit it and ask them to do it again. Like,
Yeah,
that's
so,
what we have to
so
do.
the question would be is, do we wanna put it on the next warrant? And if we do, does the select board want to just put back exactly what was approved? Because we're just putting it back up because it was kind of a clerical error and it was already approved at town meeting? Or does the select board wanna review it and put forward its own?
I have no
version.
problem with the version that we passed, I was fine with it, if you have a strong feeling one way or the other, I mean, I feel like if someone isn't doing their job, we should be able to remove them. Because we've had circumstances in the past where people were elected to a position and didn't do the job. And I mean, didn't show up to the office and were getting paid,
Right.
right, like, yeah, I'm talking about an old town clerk, I'm not even talking about the select board situation. And I think that's unconscionable. To be elected to a position, not do the job, is not acceptable to me. I don't like the job you do, I mean, like, you don't do the job. Those aren't the same, so.
Alright, well, if, put it on your,
For next week, can we vote on, it so I can read through it again? I-
Yeah.
well,
sure.
it will be on probably the annual town meeting in May.
Yeah,
Right.
so.
We have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just, put it on the
You have
long-term
a list.
list, yeah, we'll put it on the long.
Unless we wanna call it non-budgetary and try and move it to the fall stuff coming.
And please, everyone, again, if we put it back on, it's not a bylaw, it's a special act,
Yes,
so we don't need to go through that again.
so we don't need to go through that during, it's a special act. I just said non-budgetary,
Yes,
is mine, yeah.
Okay, so we're all aware of that. VADAR contract renewal. I didn't have any questions.
The sign is just Justin.
Did anyone else have any questions? Okay, I'll motion to renew the contract for the accounting software.
Second,
There's no discussion, so we'll call a vote,
yes.
Yes,
and yes, so it's unanimous,
And Mari, you aren't using that software yet, right?
No.
Or do you think you might wanna transition to it, so all of the groups are using the same software, or no?
Melissa had mentioned it, I said I'd look at it, but right now we actually have a contract with the other software company, so.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying in the future would be something we could look at, but it wasn't in my short-term plan.
Okay. And I honestly don't know how much efficiency it would be to have all three, but it's something to consider. It might not make a difference.
Notary insurance policy renewal, any questions?
No.
I'll move to renew the notary insurance policy. And we'll call a vote. I'll vote yes,
yes.
and so that's unanimous. Renewal. So I'm not expecting, the next item is the physical computer server. And I'm not expecting that we'll make a decision tonight for many reasons, including, I think we'll probably consult with our new IT consultant on the matter and what the cost estimates are. But it was, and I don't think that we should really do everything based on the cost. Some of it has to be based on cybersecurity and redundancy and having a good IT system. But it was first raised to my attention by the tax collector that there's an additional cost to host the tax collector software, not locally. And then the assessor's office discovered or pointed out that it's gonna be about, the way that I understand it, $6,500 per year to host, every year to host their software, not locally. And excuse my, I don't know, I don't understand servers very well, but.
I mean, the devil's in the detail, or the details are in the devil, whatever. If they're gonna host a server, you wanna know what the service agreement is. Like if usually they're like Windows server software, say it's on that, that's the platform. Are they putting all the security upgrades on it? What is the redundancy in the server?
So one of the things that the chair of the board of assessors brought to my attention was that actually the assessor's office would prefer in the long term to host their software in, not locally. Because they feel that it's more secure and the updates would happen more regularly. But to complicate that, there's a downtime when they're moving the server. And the assessor's office would prefer to not have that downtime until at least February of this year.
That's probably a possibility. I'm not that close to it, but I can understand doing it there. It's whoever we decide to use, it's having them map out how they're gonna do it. It meets our needs and everything else.
Mhm.
You can start with segments,
Mhm.
and then you can add as you go
Migrating
along.
pieces.
Yeah, the question is, you probably have a server downstairs, and you do have a server, are all the security upgrades on it?
And it's old, right? Like,
So if you
I
don't-
think that
so
if we want
you-
to maintain an on-site server, we'd have to get new equipment. I doubt.
Well, I'm sure
15 years old.
servers are typically replaced every 3 to 4 years.
And it's 15 years old, this is
Yeah,
what I'm
so-
saying.
And if it's that, it's not secure,
No.
because typically as you do applications to secure it, you need more memory, more process, and they just don't have that capacity.
So,
You know, I wrote that note today, you know, here were some of the questions we need to ask, you know, I talked to Melissa the other day, the people that are proposing, what is their service agreement, what's their availability, what's their organizational chart for, because you go with a smaller, lots of times, oh yeah, we have one person certified, well, that person's away, and they service it. You know, she works on Saturday, if something went wrong with Saturday, do they have someone to service it on a Saturday? You know, they're just a 9 to 5 shop. So those are listed out some questions, we should start putting them out to the people that are proposing to help us.
And then we need to be able to weigh the answers, because typically to get that kind of 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service, right, you're paying for a larger infrastructure and tends to be
Yeah,
more
but they tend to
expensive.
be larger companies.
Right.
That have a lot more in there, so.
Yep.
You know, so we'll just have to see where
Yeah,
it's going. It's been a
exactly.
few years since I've done a contract with them.
but for now, I guess, as we look at IT consultants and decide how to move going forward, let's keep in mind that, because it sounds like because of the 5-year reval, the assessor's office would prefer to keep this server, at least nurse it along through next winter, spring, even though they would prefer in the long term to not have their data hosted on a local server, so.
But by the time we find an IT and get a contract that might be a reasonable time anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you
So
can
just,
start tomorrow.
well, a couple of things, one is, and the reason I sort of got stuck with mine is that we had signed a contract not for the company to host. We did not pay for that service or sign up for that service. I don't have anything in my budget for them to host this year, so I sort of talked them into they were trying to finagle and saying, well, we just won't bill you till next July. But, you know, but I don't think the assessors have the 6,500 in their budget, I would guess, right now, to switch in February anyway. But I think what I just wanted clarification of is, because, and maybe I'm confused, what I'm talking about is that the company that owns my software is gonna host it somewhere else.
Okay.
And then, whether it's Microsoft goes up in the cloud here, the assessors go up here, I mean, I don't think there's a Monterey server somewhere else. It's just, everybody is gonna be in different places, right? Like VADAR is gonna be VADAR and everybody, right? So that like my current computer needs to be backed up somewhere, I guess it would go to Microsoft 365, is that true, Melissa?
Right now, you're being backed up to the server down there and in the cloud.
Okay, because the server's going to the cloud. Right, but if we eliminate the server,
We'll all go right to the cloud.
we'll go right to the cloud. I assume there'd be an added expense for that.
I guess I'm waiting for the new IT vendors to.
Okay, like, the bottom line is that it's just, instead of having it all on the server in town hall, you're with here, you're with here, you're with here, everybody's just spread out to wherever they need to be, so it's not right that someone's gonna have our server in the cloud.
But if
But
we
you do it
host,
both ways.
if we
You can do it
hosted
either
your
way.
program on our server, even if it's not a physical server in town hall, it would still be, we wouldn't be paying the
In
software
other
company
words,
to host it.
we're talking also about an option of having a Monterey server in the cloud.
I haven't gotten into the
Okay.
specifics.
Yeah, that's not my understanding.
So you're saying particular software, hers would be done with her company, tax assessor would be done with hers?
Right.
No,
Just like right now that the accounting and treasurer software is hosted
by them.
by
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
the building software, the board of health software,
yeah, okay.
the transfer station.
Right, it's, the costs can spiral because you don't have control over those costs, right? They can just put these increases in every year. And again, it's not about the cost, it's about the best. And as I said before, my concern is if the internet's down, you can't work, right? Whereas here, we have a generator, if it's in the building, we can work, right? The tornado comes through and takes out.
No, I think the generator is only attached to minimal lights and I believe the police computer.
Okay, well, regardless, if internet is down, we're all dead.
Then no one gets tax bills.
That's great too. So anyway, so basically what I'm saying is that I have, just to clarify, I was supposed to make my switch now for the next upcoming bills, but I postponed that switch. But they would like me to get the switch done by November, so I'm hoping we'll have an IT person sooner rather than later who can help us figure this out.
We're, like, it's in the works now.
Great.
we're
Just
for
waiting on the
written
actual
estimates.
quote.
Perfect.
Alright, we'll keep that all in mind. And yeah, I was surprised because I just talked to Scott Steibel of the, as chair of the Board of Assessors. And at first with the high price tag for having Patriot hosting the Assess Pro, I thought maybe we would consider hosting it on a town server. But Scott made the point that if Patriot hosts it, it is kept up to date more regularly and whatnot, and it's more secure, and it's probably just the right thing to do.
Although I'll just say this, and the reason I'm hesitant to do this is I said to my software company, why is it so important to you that you host it? And they said, so we can go in and make changes whenever we want. And I said, what kind of changes? They said, well, like corrections to your payments. And I said, what do you mean? Why would you correct my payments? Right now, when my software company wants to make any changes in my database, they log me in, I watch them, I see what they're doing, right? And maybe I'm being a little too nervous, but it makes me nervous to know that anybody can go in and change your software without you even knowing.
It makes me nervous too,
Yeah.
actually, Lauren.
But it's the way of the world, that's what we do with VADAR, right, they're up there, right? So anyways, as long as we can get it all sorted out, that's all.
If they make amendments, because I referenced VADAR, anybody that goes into VADAR, it logs who did it. So if something was changed, it would log that they made a change, correct?
I don't know, I haven't seen it, I've never been hosted by someone else. I'm a little bit of a control freak. And so when my software company says we're gonna download the new sets of bill, I log them in, I watch them do it, I know it's done, and then they're off my computer.
Alright.
But that's just me, and I know I'm a little back in time and I need to get into the modern time. And I'm sure we'll all be on the cloud everywhere within a year, but I'm just, those are my concerns.
Okay, so as we'll keep it all in mind as we talk to our new IT consultant. And I think especially, we'll have to see what they can do, hopefully, to nurse the current local server through the end of the revow.
Well, the end of the fiscal year, I think, right? If nobody has money to have people host.
I think that would be an unforeseen event.
Well, we'll see.
All of the sum total of the unforeseen events, if we're talking about everybody having a $6,500 bill, could be quite a bit.
Well,
Because the other ones are all in place already, we don't
Right,
know.
it's just the assessors and the tax
Right,
collector
it's
and
just
people's
that.
computers,
Okay.
right, people's computers.
And the rough numbers I'm getting for a server right now with installation is about 10.5.
Really?
But-
Direct from John Shannon.
But if we were just,
Told me
I mean,
seven.
if we were just talking money, 10.5, and then maintenance versus 6,500 every year,
But
we
if
would get another physical
But
server
if it's
maybe.
10.5 every 3 years, plus somebody has to physically maintain it.
Yeah. Well, but I don't know if we're gonna look at it purely from a financial point of view, if there's other security concerns and whatnot, so. But maybe it's less secure. Anyways, I think we went down the rabbit hole.
Yep.
And, we all are aware of what's upcoming. The next item is a size waiver for fire company stake row signs. Sean Tryon brought it to my attention that they usually put a large sign at 57 and 23 and then at the fire station. And if you look in the zoning bylaws, it says, no temporary sign shall exceed 4 square feet in total area or industry standard, which is 2 feet by 2 feet. Or
Or square feet is tiny.
That's just one of those little signs.
It's a
But-
really little sign.
But then signs announcing public events sponsored by civic or social organizations to be displayed for not more than 30 days prior to the event. The select board may grant size waivers for these temporary signs.
I vote that we give them a size waiver for this temporary sign for the state first.
I second.
Okay, any other discussion? We'll vote yes.
Yes.
But they still are limited to only displaying it for not more than 30 days prior to the event.
That's fair. Not that many people probably want to buy tickets 4 months in advance, but, I mean, when do they usually hold it? August, right?
What's that? Last Saturday in August.
Last
Yeah,
Saturday.
like
So
July
it's 2
24th.
weeks, by the time they get out there to put the sign up.
I know, exactly.
We are tabling the elected and appointed officials guide.
Yes, I'd like to ask you.
I had not done touch-up, I had not done close edits, I had a couple ideas, and maybe, should I share them?
Yeah.
with you?
Okay.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm worried about is now the court said that we can't stop rude speech. I don't know if we can ask our public officials to not be rude or not.
I did just attend those SJC,
Yeah,
things. You can
did
ask
you?
people if they're being, valedictorian, like, religion or race or something, you can say stuff, but otherwise you just let them. They really suggested that all boards should, on public comment, have a strict time limit.
Yeah,
that
that's
people are
what they
allowed to
said the other day when I went to that train.
So that, everybody knows that they have 3 minutes and that's it.
Yeah.
Could be within 3 minutes.
The thing is that I've always thought, so we have a vague comments and questions from the public, and we always allow anyone to speak, and that's where we can put the 3-minute limit. On other agenda items, I always thought we got away with, that's not on topic, if something's not on topic.
That works as long as the person doesn't go on for 10 minutes on topic being derogatory.
Well, but if you're
derogatory.
saving the
Right,
comments,
derogatory.
if you're saving the comments for the end, you tell them, hold that thought to the end.
And, right,
But right now, we're talking specifically like this.
yeah.
Because you asked, is there any other comments before, or discussion before we take a vote?
Right.
The public can say yes, but if they get off topic, you can say,
Right.
okay, you can save your comments, questions about your subject
Till the end.
till the end.
Yeah, anyways, and that also has to do with meetings, public meetings, right? And so I didn't know if it's even relates to the officials, the elected officials, so I don't wanna go down that.
There's two different issues.
There's
One
two
is,
different
does the, trying to get our elected and appointed officials to act like reasonable members of their boards or committees.
Yeah.
And not be rude and disrespectful to their fellow members or to members of the public. The second one is how those boards and commissions deal with members of the public.
But I did
But-
wonder if members of the public are allowed to be rude, and we can't prevent them from being rude, are members of the board allowed to be rude, and we can't prevent them from being rude?
I think an appointed, I don't think we could do anything about an elected official, but we definitely could about an appointed, because they technically work at the pleasure of the town. And we wouldn't allow an employee to be rude and disrespectful to members of the public. They would be considered a right applicable offense. Right, on their own time, they can do it, but they can't do it on our time.
Not paid them.
Well, anyways, I don't wanna go too deep into that, but, we'll take up the guide next week.
Okay.
Maybe, I have something you wanna add.
Maybe not next week, maybe,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
okay.
one of the two.
2 days.
Um,
Yeah, it's fine.
Under unanticipated business, I did not have real business, but I did wanna throw some ideas around about the appointment list. So Melissa and I had shared a draft, and I just had a couple questions. So the transfer station committee, is that something, I have not been to any of the meetings, I've
We
seen some of
haven't
them.
met in a while, so the question is whether it needs to remain or should be dissolved.
That's was my question,
Right, that is a good question,
and we don't need to decide today, but I'm just,
but it might be worth, if we're gonna keep it, we might wanna appoint another person,
Mhm.
because Ken resigned. If we dissolve it, so, yeah, let me think about it, and maybe I should call a meeting of the committee to decide if we think it's time to dissolve it or not.
yeah. And you're a majority, you're half the people, so I just,
I
while we're
am,
doing.
but if I was gonna make that call, I would actually like Jim and Melissa's opinion
Yeah.
about it too, because, part of the way I viewed it was to support them,
Mhm.
as well as to, impinge my own ideas on it. but, I think that's important, and if they want the support, then I'm gonna say we should find another person, and if they think it isn't necessary, and I both think it isn't, then, yeah.
So that's one thought. And then previously, the board, the Concom appointed an agent, and the select board at the time agreed that the Concom appoints the agent, the select board doesn't appoint the agent. So I was on that board, and I agreed that the Concom appointed the agent. I don't remember the laws that we were looking at and whatnot, but so this board could say, no, we think the select board appoints the Concom agent and we want to, or it could agree with the previous board and say that the select board doesn't appoint the Concom agent. The Concom.
I concur with you based on my recollection
Okay.
of that situation, that
Okay.
it was pretty clear that it's under the purview of others.
Yeah. And then,
I didn't even think that was in question. I mean, I thought
Yeah.
it was very clear.
well, just as we're going through the
Right,
appointment
appointments,
list, I just
okay,
wanna make
gotcha,
sure.
yeah.
Any other unanticipated business?
No.
Comments and questions from the public, Mickey?
Yeah, I have something that I didn't know I was going to mention until right before I left my house. And I got word from, my daughter sent out a text that says that the court has voted in favor of Hume for the RVs.
Yes.
And so you knew that, okay, I'm glad you had that.
Sadly, we do, yeah.
Yeah, so the decision is, have you seen the decision?
I didn't read anything that she said, I just got saw that headline.
So, yes,
I threw it
that
on the
did,
screen,
that did
27
happen.
times.
And there was some discussion about the cost, which ended up being,
It was just, wasn't it 20-something thousand? I have to go back.
out of the 30,
Yeah, it was like 24, I believe.
okay. I remember there being money left over. But that was only the very last fighting at the Supreme Judicial Court, not the previous appeal or the initial case.
That's right.
So that whole case ended up being
On the Hume, did you see Eileen's message?
about pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
She
think,
talked to one of the new director, I think it said in the email. We talked a little bit at the finance, but, she was thinking that some of us or somebody needs to meet with them from the relationship, because if we're gonna go through this process. Melissa gave us an update that they still have to do all the building permits and go through that process for getting prepared for them.
And I had a conversation with Alex Glover, their attorney, a while ago, after the case was argued, but before the decision, in which she raised the question to me, basically saying that she feels that Hume would be interested in talking to the town about possible pilot payments. So I think they're already thinking about that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right way to approach it is, but
Well, Melissa, you said Jim had already been talking to someone up there.
Well, Jim's been talking to Laura about the road and the issues with the road.
yeah, I mean, my view on pilot is that it's good. And I don't know, I wouldn't at this point in time, since we just lost a case and, made them spend money on legal fees when they were right, ultimately, ask them.
I'm not gonna
Right
say they
now.
were right. Their choice was upheld, but I'm not gonna say that they were right.
But,
In the court of law, they want.
and
That's right.
since pilot is only ever really voluntary, as far as I understand it, that, how do you approach that kind of subject? And I'm not opposed to doing it at some point.
I agree with you. I think we should put it on the calendar, talk about it more.
And I think, I see your point, I'm just gonna put out there that it's the sort of conversation that takes more than one conversation over time. But ultimately, that RV situation, we don't know exactly what kind of wear and tear it's gonna result in, because we don't know what they'll actually on the ground be doing with those RVs. Are they gonna put mobile homes in just for their staff? Are people gonna be coming back and forth every weekend with a rather heavy RV? But one thing we can say for sure is if there is back and forthing of RVs on that road, we're gonna have problems with that road. I don't I don't think any rational person that's driven up and down that road would say otherwise. So ultimately, the town has to would be responsible about the road, and it's gonna cost us a bundle of money.
Well, I think part of having the meeting is to
Just don't know how
understand the
much
plan,
money.
you know, is it every weekend for 12 weeks, is it once a quarter, or you just don't know.
We don't know, and I don't think they even know, that could be part
Well,
of it.
they own 2 camps in California, I have a sense that they probably know what they're doing.
Right,
I mean, they may be a religious organization, but they're also a business, and they, you know, to do that work, they know what the financial model is.
Any other comments and questions? Go to minutes. June 6th. So there's a little discussion about fiber connect. It's now covering the entire town from the original agreement with the town, which excluded the lower part of River Road, the lower part of Berkshire Road, one house on Sharon Road.
so maybe it should read, it's now covering the entire town, explore part of?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think,
so-
but it should be the entire town from the original agreement with the town, because I have wondered before about houses that are built since that contract was signed.
I see. Where any of the houses.
And I'm sure a lawyer,
Covered area.
well, there's one house in particular that didn't have electricity, I'm not sure if it's covered or not.
Grass?
Yeah,
Right.
but I don't wanna get into it.
Yeah.
That's why I say from the original agreement and the
Okay.
lawyers at some point, but Adam reported that Fiber Connect is now covering the entire town from the original agreement with the town, which excluded the lower part of River Road, one house on Terrian Road, and one, it's in Monterey, but it borders Otis and Terrian
Okay.
very closely, and I don't know how to word that one near Otis and Terrian.
Delete all of all of the homes online too? Do you want me to write?
Yeah.
You want, okay.
And then one is just one, obviously, and then one, the way I have it written is one near Otis and Terrian, I couldn't think of a better way to put it.
That works.
If you've ever driven by it, it's landlocked, right? The rest of Monterey has coverage now. Adam will send the paperwork to sign for milestone 3. Yes, and I'll agree with your comment. Justin asked on behalf of the resident if there is a cancellation fee after the initial term. And that there is. So then the clerk appointments are dealt with later, so we can just delete that.
Just delete it
sure.
here, okay.
So, I think was it Kevin? Yeah, I think it was Kevin who was discussed the position.
Yes.
Okay, for some reason I thought it was me.
He talked about how,
His
like,
research.
his research.
Yes,
and what- Yeah,
the board, he expressed the importance of working with John Field as part of the role of tree warden, as well as representing the interests of town residents. Right, that should go there. And then the board was grateful to have 2 good applicants for the position. Does that work?
yep.
And then
Delete Justin.
yes, I did that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You're keeping track.
Yeah,
Okay, cool,
And
alright, that's
then
great.
the only next thing is the thing about moving it to open meeting law, moving the appointment to today.
So delete that whole sentence, though,
Yeah.
the one that has, you deleted it, and I
Yeah.
had a thing, so make sure the whole thing's.
And then Frank made a motion to nominate Kevin West as tree warden, Sue seconded, just suggested putting the appointment on the agenda for next week, since the open meeting law requires that the names of appointees are listed on the agenda, except in extreme circumstances.
Yeah, same thing with the select board, I mean, do we need to put it in there, and if we do, can we put it with a?
That we
five-point?
sign the Fiber Connect contract?
Yeah.
I think we should, because I've had multiple people tell me
Yeah.
that we need to look into the Fiber Connect more before we sign it, and
So let's
Oh,
just, can we just
very
move it to
good.
the end of the Fiber Connect thing, so if someone's scanning it and finding Fiber Connect, the whole thing about Fiber Connect is in one place? I don't think it needs to be chronological, I think it needs to be,
It needs to be stated.
it
I'm
just
not-
needs to be in there.
I'm not nitpicky of whether it's chronological or not.
It just bugs me that it's broken up.
Yeah, well, what's broken up in the meeting?
Yeah,
And
but
we
who
said we
cares?
want it chronological, so, alright, we'll move this to, after the,
I kinda like it that way too.
What?
Cause then you know that it was dealt with later, like if you were looking at the agenda,
Ah, I see your point.
you know, or if you wanted to just go to the meeting tape and be like,
And
oh,
you
so they
find
talked about
where-
it in this part, and then you say, you have to sit there and listen for an hour.
I'm
because you
okay
didn't
with it,
actually
it doesn't matter that much to me, if people think.
we'll just
we're
leave,
gonna do it.
then we'll just leave it where it is. And, I mean, I think well,
more accurately reflects what actually happened.
That's fair.
oh, and then just to touch base on the poll, the telephone poll. I don't feel inclined to do anything different than what is there now. If anyone else had
You need an engineer to figure that one out.
any ideas.
Or really.
And plus I feel like, there are some places that people have accidents. And I don't think there's a huge number of accidents there, as far as I can tell. This happened to be an accident, but I'm not sure that it warrants any action on our part.
But if anyone else thought things differently, then say so at some point, but
Yep.
that's how we're at that.
Alright, so I move we approve the minutes as amended.
Second, any discussion, there being none, we'll vote.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll finish that. So, just to say, I guess what I can say during open meeting about the document collection. If I'm coordinating, if I need something from someone, I will reach out to them, or
Okay.
someone else will reach out to them. But that's how it's gonna work, I guess.
I just want clarity on how, like, who the third party would be that
Yeah.
would be looking at my email and how they get access.
Yes, so what I have pushed for, and I'm almost certain will happen, is well, it's hard because I don't always hear back from.
I get it.
I think there's not going to be real-time email monitoring without notice. To the extent that if someone's email is being searched, they'll be notified prior.
Okay.
But I don't even know because it's kind of up in the air at this point.
Okay.
But I think at this point, there's a couple specific people I asked for specific things from, but if I didn't ask you, don't worry at this point.
Okay.
And that's all.
You're taking care of it, Lawless will contact me, that's fine. I don't necessarily have a problem as long as I feel like it's a neutral party that's doing it.
Yeah.
And that we have taken security precautions so that whatever backdoor they use to get in,
Well, on the town server, the cloud server.
whatever server, right? If someone is accessing my email with, they either need my password to do it, or they're being given a backdoor password, but I would like verification that the backdoor is shut when they're done.
Yeah.
Right, I would not like that door remaining open, that is not secure,
No, it will all be professional.
that would be
above
great,
board.
I believe you.
Motion to adjourn,
Second,
yes.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned, and this is, this meeting adjourned at 7:28 PM.
thank you, gentlemen, fine meeting.